All right, welcome back. Topic 2.5 green design. So, in the past topics, we talked a lot about legislation, about energy, storage, some kind of big picture questions. Now, we're going to focus in a little bit more down to green design and how to use it with some objectives, some strategies, and ways to kind of focus in and look more at products and how designers might be able to use some green design principles in particular products. Okay, you can have a read through these. So, like I said, objectives, strategies, some of these things you've already seen before about legislation, so it won't be new, but yeah, there it is. All right, so we'll keep going. Okay, first thing, design objectives. So this is important to pay attention to. Here's two links inside the presentation. You can have a look, flip through, try to find some green design products. We'll refer back to them later, okay? So you can click on these. This bike is another good example. It cleans water as you're pedaling. So pretty clever, but there's lots and lots of different green design products that you can look up and find. Maybe you know some that already exist. Okay, so there's three big categories that the objectives are put into: materials, energy, pollution, and waste. So when you say objectives, aims, goals, things that design is trying to meet that can fit into materials, energy, and then pollution and waste. So that's why this topic is called waste management and resource management, because a lot of it's about the materials, a lot of it's about pollution and waste and energy. So design objectives, there they are, all 8 of them. Okay, you can press pause, have a read through. It's similar to things that we've seen before about increasing efficiency, reducing any long-term effects to the environment, end of disposal. You've seen a lot of these things before, but the IB gives you a specific list of 8 design objectives. Pay attention because these are objectives. Later on, we'll talk about strategies. All right, so this is big picture. What are a couple of things or objectives that the products try to achieve as they're created or as they're done? So, first task in this subtopic. What I would like you to do is in that form, I want you to try to find a green product and tell me what were some of those strategies, some of these strategies that have been used in that design product, that green design product. What is it that they're trying to achieve? Have these objectives been achieved? How have they been achieved? So here's a couple of examples. These shoes, there's leaving no mark in the environment. So if you look back, it's minimizing damage or pollutants from chosen material because of these biodegradable shoes. Okay, so you're trying to connect these objectives with the products that you've found. All right, reducing dematerialization. This is another thing we talked about before too, but you can see the way that the product is packaged. There's lots and lots of examples. Tesla is another type of example. You can flip through these slides, press pause, look back at these objectives, and type it in, put it in your notes, put it in that questionnaire. Make sure you try to find an objective, or sorry, try to find a product that reaches or tries to aim for these objectives. Okay, here's a couple of more, and look how it's specifically highlighted those 2 objectives. Okay. Good. This was from past year. You can see Solomon's on there. Jackets, same type of thing. Those are 2 of those objectives that they're trying to meet. Okay, electric cars. All right, so why do it? Hopefully you've pressed pause and now we're back. And why is it? What is it that kind of creates these? What are some drivers? That's a word that pops up often in the IBDT, drivers. So there's 2 things. According to the IB, consumer pressure and legislation is what makes people want to achieve these goals or go after those objectives. consumer pressure and legislation. So one thing, people aren't happy with what happened. There was a problem at Chernobyl. Al Gore and his inconvenient truth speeches. You see a lot of these websites, a lot of things that pop up, the consumers are the ones that say, oh, based on this, I want to have 100% organic certified products, whatever it is. So that's something the consumer pressures the companies to try to create those products. So if you look at Patagonia as an example, and they always, a lot of the consumers want these green products. And so that's what forces the companies to make some of these decisions. Better informed of product's impact. So, and the consumers could be based on, they'll buy it according to certain types of environmental criteria. So you've seen this before. Consumers defined by particular types of issues: eco-warrior, eco-champion, eco-fan, and eco-phobes. Okay? So this is something that you've seen before, but it's just a way to put these consumers into these different categories. All right? Second one is legislation. So like we talked about in the previous subtopics, legislation, by having these legislation, it encourages design to try to tackle some of these environmental issues. Because according to law, these people have to think about the environment, design with the environment, and understand those things. So it's important that governments can create these laws so that people do the right thing. There are things that exist, such as the European Environmental Agency, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. So there's Clean Air Acts, there's standardizations, and all standardization organizations. And all these places are the ones that design, develop, assess how products and manufacturers are impacting the environment. And this helps give guidelines from the environment for what the manufacturers need to do. So a couple of specific examples. Again, we've talked about the take-back legislations before. Remember, take-back policies. The governments require companies to take back products when they're not working or when they're broken, so they can take back any of those products if something's wrong. Another thing is labeling. So we've seen in plastics, there's these different types of plastics, but they're labeled so that when you can recycle them, you know where they need to go. I think we heard about in Germany how based on these different labels, you can recycle things in different places and get money back as well too, all right? These types of energy labels show how efficient or inefficient some of the products are. Energy Star, Green Building, Energy Stars for products, how energy efficient they are. Green Building Council is in buildings. They also use these types of things to identify the sustainability, the green design that happens within these products. So, and also labeling is a good way to show for consumers to understand what type of product they're getting. It's nice to show that consumer, this is what you've got, this is where it's coming from, so that also it helps the consumer and maybe even kind of solve some of that drivers where that's the consumer pressure. So it helps provide some more information for the consumers. Okay, so here's a little bit of information about the different emissions from different countries, and just to show how legislation, based on those emissions, legislation can be created, right? So we've seen this thing before, and remember that legislation takes a long time rather than a quick change. Kind of like the LADA is nice and slow, as opposed to it kind of consistently stays the same, right? Incremental changes versus radical. And a lot of that is from the past, and some of those past topics that we talked about. It just takes governments longer to make decisions. They have to balance a lot, lots of people that are involved. So it's important that you remember that what that driver is legislation, but it does take time. Okay. Similar type of thing. This just adds into the legislation. I talked about Kyoto before. There's prevention principles. So it's important things can be prevented ahead of time and precautionary. So some of this stuff happens after something bad happens. They'll say, oh no, Chernobyl happened, the nuclear power blew up. Oh, we need to put in some regulations. So those are precautionary, as opposed to prevention, which is things that happen, they're more prepared for ahead of time. So those are two important things to consider in these drivers. Okay? So here's the last part of green design. Strategies. Remember in the previous one, I was talking about objectives. So here's some strategies if you're going to design a product, things that are important to consider, some strategies. These are 7, all right? You can see these, again, it's not unfamiliar to you. End-of-life disposal, thinking about the pollutants, thinking about packaging, thinking about the chemicals inside of the materials. So how you can analyze a product based on these strategies. That's your next task from this subtopic, is to find a product, anyone you want, and then look at these strategies and evaluate them based on the, pick the product and evaluate the product based on these strategies. All right, so here's a couple of examples, and we also use something called SWOT to analyze products. So SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So looking at the strengths of this, well, see how there's a paper on the outside? That's nice, that's recyclable. However, the packaging is a bit wasted because you've got all this extra packaging for a banana. Threats, it could also have putting in toxic chemicals like the ink on the packaging can be leached into soil when it's sent to the landfill. And maybe you got some ideas too, right? So it's important to keep the banana ripe and free from brushes or bruises in transportation. So they could really consider some of these objectives and how you could use maybe a new type of packaging to protect the bananas that's also biodegradable, right? So I want you to do that. You're going to analyze a product based on these strategies, and I would suggest using these SWOT. You can put the link in your answer, or you can just write it down ahead in that form. All right, remember it's going to be in that form. It's important that you do that. So here's some other examples, right? This is packaging. Again, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Here's another one as well too, right? So you can see how it was analyzed and what the differences are. Another one about Coke cans, okay? You can take your time, flip through these. Here's a few more, okay? So in summary, there's 4 important things, right? Number 1, the environmental categories: materials, energy, pollution, and waste. And then based off of those things, you can talk about objectives. So what are these objectives, these aims that the green design is trying to achieve? And then lastly, looking at strategies. So here's the strategies that you could use if you were to design a new product that can reduce environmental impact and be a more green design. Okay, the drivers we talked about before, remember, legislation and consumer pressure. All right, so if you've got any questions, put them down in the comments, or you can email me directly as well too. I hope that one's clear. Remember, go back, flip through. You've got 2 things to do. 1, find a green product and how have they achieved those objectives. 2, find any product and tell me if it has or if it hasn't. You're just evaluating that product based on some of those strategies. Okay? All right. Keep going. Keep saving the world with green design. Bye.